So that song, it was written by Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, and it reached number 7 on the Billboard charts from their Bridge Over Troubled Water album. Sometime back, Paul Simon, he talked about writing the song with Rolling Stone magazine after Rolling Stone named it number 105 in the top 500 songs of all time. And here's what he said. I put the quote up on the screens. The song takes on the form of a first-person lament. It describes a person's struggle to overcome loneliness and meaninglessness. The final verse switches to a third-person sketch of a boxer who, despite being hit hard, perseveres. A real fighter, no matter how tough the opponent, remains and finishes. Then he goes on to say that I was reading the Bible around that time. That's where I think phrases such as workman's wages and seeking out the poor quarters came from. It was a spiritual time for me. I think the song was about me. Everybody is beating me up, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do if it doesn't stop. You know, I really like the original song, and then when Doug Melder pointed out to me that it was on the new Mumford & Son CD, another band that's new that I really like, I just took a time and I re-looked at sort of the lyrics, and he and I were talking about it, and both of us, it just reminded us a little bit of that prodigal son story from the Bible. You know, I talk to people constantly, maybe over coffee or, you know, over lunch or sometimes after a church service, and they don't despise God, or Jesus. They don't have really even any problem with the church, but for whatever reason, they've lost their way, and they've wandered from faith. You know, maybe life has just piled up on them. In some cases, religious systems may have left them feeling empty. And Doug and I, we both talk to a lot of people that they know that there's something missing in their life because of this distance with God. And they often want to, like the prodigal son, to return home, but they really don't know how to come back to faith. And unfortunately, like the prodigal son story, I think many times folks need to find themselves in an absolute hopeless, rock-bottom situation before they'll begin their journey home. And today, I want to talk about, a really important question. And it's simply this: where are you with Jesus? Are you on a train headed the opposite direction? Maybe currently you're in sort of a state of rebellion. Maybe you're just, not now, God. I've got so much going on in my life right now. Maybe you want to head home, but you're not really sure how. Or maybe the reality is, if you're really honest, you just haven't even thought about it in a long time. We are in a season that happens every 4 years in this country, right? Election time. We're going to make a decision on our next president. It's a big decision. But I believe the decision or the answer to the question that I want to talk to you about today, where you are with Jesus, you should feel an overwhelming sense of urgency about it. However, if I were to be frank with you, for many people, I don't see a sense of urgency, importance, or desperation. And what I do see sometimes is this overall spiritual, where are you with Jesus? It's almost like, what are you doing for lunch today? What are you doing this weekend? Where are you with Jesus? Do you want to know one of the most gut-wrenching places I find myself from time to time? It's in a prayer circle with a parent that is asking for God to allow their son or daughter to hit rock bottom. The parent or parents have reached a point where they just don't know what else to do. They've exhausted all options. They've been disappointed, brokenhearted, lied to repeatedly, and they don't feel like they have any options left. And I'm literally in a prayer circle sometimes, and they say, God, I simply do not know what else to pray. If you need to have him or her hit rock bottom, then so be it. It's this desperate spot where a parent is basically praying for their own child, and they're saying, go ahead, God, break her or him. I've been in those prayer circles, and it's excruciating. But do you know what I believe? That maybe is a little bit more palatable, but possibly more dangerous. It's this. It's when someone navigates life, though it might have its hills and sort of bumps along the way, yet they remain completely indifferent to God. They're never faced with a rock bottom sort of moment or one of those crossroads of faith moments where you absolutely have to make a decision whether you're going to reject what Jesus promises or you're going to believe him, that it's demanded. And therefore, they just assume that they're good. God and I are good. I can't tell you, to be honest, how many times I've heard that in conversations when I ask people where they're at with faith, where they're at with God. God and I, we're all good. We're good. And when I ask, translate that for me, tell me what that means. And they'll say something like, well, I believe in God. And I like a lot of the stuff that he's about. And I believe that for the most part, God, is okay with the stuff that I'm doing, most of it. And in the end, we'll all be good. I don't want to get real heavy right away. I promise I'm going to lighten up a little bit. But for some of you, in the end, you're not going to be good. You and God won't be good. And I think if it's just this casual, yeah, God and I, we're good, you're believing a lie. A lie. Quick pause here just for anyone in the room that maybe considers themselves currently an atheist. Maybe you've dug in hard to that. I mean, you've read extensively. You've tore into the scriptures and examined them. You've looked at opposing views, and you've come to the decision there is no God. Well, let me say this in an odd sort of way. I can respect that. I don't agree with your decision. It breaks my heart. But at least maybe you've made a decision. But if that's you, I just want to challenge you with something. Be honest for a moment. If you call yourself an atheist, and if it's because maybe you saw a 60-minute documentary once that convinced you, or you had a teacher in college that was an atheist and you sort of liked him, or you're just saying that because it really upsets your mom and dad, can I really challenge you? Be sure. Exhaust every single resource. Dr. Randy Stringer is a professor at Grove City College, specialized in apologetics. He would love to sit with you and give you some resources. Dr. Jim Platt on our teaching team would love to sit with you and talk through you about this. And this is not an apologetic sermon, meaning my goal is not to try to convert atheists to Christians in the next 30 minutes. That would be cliche and really silly. But I am saying this to you. You are literally risking your life with that decision. And I hope you are sure, because eternity is a long time to be reminded you were wrong. People have been reminding me for the last 2 months that I was wrong about the 2012 Pittsburgh Pirates. Eternity being reminded of a wrong decision is a long, long time. It's longer than 20 years of losing baseball, right? That was a bonus point right there. There's no charge on that one. Here's what I do want to address then, if I'm not going there with our time today. I think it's something that truly hits the heart of Western PA spirituality. I believe that in this Northeast region, in this Western Pennsylvania region. Most people in the area, they grew up, going to a mainline church, Catholic denomination, Presbyterian, Methodist, etc. And you've heard a lot of folks in this area, they've heard the stories at one time or another. Sunday school, maybe they completed CCD classes, had their first Holy Communion, or maybe they were baptized as a baby and did the confirmation thing. But at some point, a lot of folks attended church, maybe even consistently, maybe even on Christmas or Easter. But then for some reason, one of two things happened. One, maybe it was college. Maybe it was your career. Maybe it was distractions. But they just caused you to slowly become less religious. And you would say that you and God, you're still good, but there's really not much evidence of it. If you were put on trial today for being a Christian, your defense team would be relying maybe on a few high school retreats, or maybe a few times where you had some crisis moments in your life and you looked to God or you showed up in church. That's about all the defense team might be able to come up with. For some of you in this group, I think you think it's God's job to take notice of you. And you say things, well, like, I'm not an axe murderer or anything. I'm a pretty good person. God should give me credit for that. And then I think there's this second group in Western PA that maybe you've even stayed involved in church and you're not even really sure why. Maybe it's out of guilt. And you want God to notice that you're doing all these things in church. Hey, God, man, I'm here most weeks. All your religious activity, you feel like it's got to count for something. If that sort of describes you, if you ever met somebody that their faith is different, and you don't even really know how to describe it, but it's really real. It shows up in their marriage. It shows up in their friendships. It just shows up in the way that they live life. And they're not like confrontational or judgmental. They've just got this deep sort of sincere faith. And you're like thinking to yourself, I've got religion, or God and I are cool, but I don't have that. I don't have that. For me, that showed up in high school, in college. I would see other people, and I'd think to myself, I don't have that. And I'd even like quiet moments, maybe late at night or early in the morning. You'd get this sort of whisper in your soul or in your gut, and I'll almost tell you, something's missing. Something's missing here. There's got to be more to life and faith than this. And in Hebrews chapter 11, it's often referred to as the Hall of Fame of Faith. Chapter 11 in Hebrews. It's this long list of folks from the Bible with these, the sort of the who's who in the Bible and their faith stories. And the writer of Hebrews lists them all. And he opens the chapter first by defining faith. And he says this, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So the text, this chapter's 11, this hall of fame when it comes to faith, it opens with a brief and simple definition of faith. It's the trust in things that you hope for, that you can't see. It goes on to talk about the ancients. They grasp this concept of God creating something that was invisible and making it visible. And then in this chapter, God begins to tell us what faith should look like by listing a bunch of famous and sometimes not so famous characters and stories from the Bible. In chapter 11, and the first sort of character that it introduces is Abel, of Cain and Abel. It introduces Abel as this first Hall of Fame faith person. And I don't know, when I think about that, I don't know that Abel would be my first pick in my fantasy faith draft, right? I think I would go for David, wiping out Goliath, or Daniel in the lion's den. Abel. I mean, I don't know that Abel killed any giants. I don't know, what he's famous for spiritually. I don't know that I would have picked him. But I think what God is saying to us here, he chose a guy that did nothing spectacular. But see, I think that what we're going to see is that faith starts with knowing the heart of God. And in verse 4, it says this: by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous. God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. So I don't know how familiar you are with the story of Cain and Abel, or what's going on here. So flip all the way back to Genesis with me. If you've got your Bibles, it'll be up on your screens. Go all the way back to Genesis 4 in verse 2. And there's very brief, this story of Cain and Abel. And it says, now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. Now get this. And the Lord had regard, which means he accepted, he liked Abel's offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry and fell on his face. Cain and Abel, they were brothers. They were the sons of Adam and Eve. And if you know this story, Cain is so furious, jealous of Abel, upset that God did not accept his offering, he kills his brother. Cain brought some fruit of the soil that he had grown as an offering to God. And Abel, he brought fat portions of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked at Abel's sacrifice with favor, and he accepted it. And he looked at Cain's, and he did not. And when I looked at this text for the first time many, many years ago, I remember coming to this conclusion. This is one of my problems with God. You never know what he wants. He seems too picky, because this doesn't make sense to me. Both of the offerings seemed fine and maybe even equal. When you break it down rationally, Cain brought an offering that took a lot more effort, right? And Abel brought an offering that cost the sheep more than it cost him. I mean, back in this time, farmers, that was hard work. Cain would have had to clear that ground and break it up and plow it and plant it and water it and weed the area and then harvest this fruit. What do shepherds do? They just sit around and watch sheep, right? I mean, sheep are fairly compliant animals. They just eat some grass. I mean, occasionally you might have to chase away a coyote or something. But overall, being a shepherd is a lot less work than being a farmer. So you would think that God would see Cain's offering and say, I see that hard work and the sweat that went into your offering. Well done, little fella. No. But God doesn't. It says he has no regard for it. And Cain is angry and defeated. Now stay with me here. I think it is easy sometimes to feel like Cain, right? On the surface, it's like, why should I even try to appease God then? What's the use? And unfortunately, all too often, sometimes religion reinforces this to us. Religion sometimes puts this weight on us that no matter how hard we try, no matter how much effort that we make, we're never going to be quite good enough. We're never going to quite measure up. And I have a suspicion that there's some of you that have been in the past or are there today. And you see following God is this form of like a guilt trip maybe. It's this list of do's and don'ts that you've got to navigate. And like Cain, I think that there are many of us that we just get angry or what's the use? But hear me on this. One of my favorite sort of authors and preachers is a guy named Erwin McManus out in Los Angeles. And I pulled a quote. It'll be up on the screens. And this is what he said about this text. Cain ushered in the beginning of religion and pushed out the grace of God. Cain was saying, I am bringing you the best I have produced, the work of my labor. And I am asking you, God, to accept me on the basis of what I have done. Brothers and sisters, that is not the story God introduced to us, McManus says. Abel came to God and said, I am bringing you a sacrifice. I am not trying to prove I am worthy. It is simply an affirmation of my love for you. There is a difference between these two offerings, folks. Cain is saying, this is what I have done, now accept me. And Abel is saying, I understand it is about what you've done that I am accepted. You know, if you share Cain's worldview, it's going to result with you being lost in your journey of faith. One of two things. Either it's going to be like a hamster on a wheel, on this religious wheel. And you're going to feel like you're going to have to keep doing more and more and more to appease God. Or you're simply going to wander off and hope that God somehow will just cut you a break in the end. And what Hebrews is ushering in here is that the most powerful and essential piece of faith is love. Faith is entering into an intimate love communion relationship with God. To sum it up for some of us, and I think I have this, we do not want God to receive us because of who He is. We want God to receive us because of who we are. And folks, that's a lie. And it led Cain, not Kent, to kill his brother. It led Cain, Kent. And like the song that we opened up with, I think that leads to loneliness and meaninglessness and despair. And maybe that's what you're experiencing today, and maybe you're not even aware. It's because of the distance that you've put between you and God. You know, when I was in 4th grade, I had a crush on my teacher, Miss Pentak. All of the boys had a crush on Miss Pentak. She was tall. She was blonde. And sometimes she wore boots and a mini skirt, and I'm not kidding. And we all tried to get Mrs. Pentak's attention. We all tried to be noticed by Mrs. Pentak throughout that whole year. She was right out of college. You know what I mean? You ever had one of those teachers when you were a kid? And she made all the other teachers seem like a dinosaur, right? Because she was so young and she was so cool. And she liked Led Zeppelin, I remember. Huh? How cool is that? I remember I borrowed my older brother Billy's Led Zeppelin CDs or albums, I guess at the time. And I spent a week memorizing the words to Whole Lotta Love. I did. I walked by Mrs. Pentak in the hall one day and I remember just saying, you need cooling. Baby, I'm not fooling. I'm going to send you back to schooling. And then you did that, I want a whole lot of love. Huh? I'd give Miss Pentak a look like, I like Zeppelin too, Miss Pentak. Anything to get Miss Pentak's attention, right? She told us one day that her parents owned this little farm nearby with a couple acres and horses. Even her parents were cool, right? They owned horses, and she was going to take us there at the end of a year for a sort of a closing picnic. And we were all so excited about this. Mrs. Pentak, she was the greatest. And the picnic came, and it was the greatest picnic ever. I mean, everyone was trying to show out for Mrs. Pentak, and everything she did was just the best thing ever. She let us ride her old horse named Butch Cassidy. And we all got to sit up on Butch Cassidy, and she just walked us around. I was like, oh, Miss Pentak, you're the greatest. Let us ride your horse. She created this game where she spray painted hundreds and hundreds of little rocks, spray painted them gold, and then spread them out all over the entire farm. And she called the game the Gold Rush. And she gave each of us like this little brown bag and told us that we had 30 minutes to go and find as much gold as possible. I mean, what a great game. I raised my hand. Miss Pentak, that's the greatest game ever. That's like the Led Zeppelin of games right there, Miss Pentak. Man, and she yelled, go. And we all went running off. And I mean, I just went over this little hill, and I'm flying looking for gold, and I slip. And I come down hard. And by the smell that instantly came over me, old Butch Cassidy had been there earlier. And I had horse stuff, right on the back of my pants. And I remember as a fourth grader, like, what are you, like 9? I mean, I was panicking. What am I going to do? I mean, I can't go down and I'll be called crappy pants for the rest of my school life. And I remember it seemed like a second. Miss Pentak must have seen what was going on. And she was sort of right beside me and said, come on, follow me. And she took me into the basement of her parents, and there was this old sort of bathroom down there. And she said, I'm going to run upstairs. I have a little brother. I'm going to cuff his pants real quick and pin him. I'll bring him down to you. You slip them on. Give me those. I'll throw them in the washer. You go play. At the end of the day, slip back here, pick up your jeans, and we'll act like this never happened. I tried to impress her for a year. I tried to, be noticed. But do you know when I realized what an incredible person she really was? When I was covered in filth and I had nowhere else to turn. When she stepped in and whisked me into that house and saved me sort of untold ridicule and cleaned up the mess that I was. Folks, God saw us as a mess. And there was nothing that we could do about it. But at that moment, it's like the heavens intersected the earth. And for a brief period of time, most historians feel that it was for no more than 30 or 35 years, Jesus arrived as fully God and fully man. And God allowed his son, Jesus, to come and clean up this mess. And Jesus grew up sinless. He was a spotless, perfect offering. And after teaching about the kingdom, after healing the sick in front of everybody to see, after doing these mind-blowing miracles that could have only been done by God, he allowed himself to be arrested, spit on, beaten half to death, nailed to a cross, crucified, dead and buried on our behalf. And on the third day, he arose again from the dead so that if we believed in him, God would no longer see our filth or our sin. He would only see his son. Cain was trying to buy God's love. Abel was simply posturing himself in a place to receive it. In that song, the song ends with this imagery of a boxer, a fighter standing in a clearing, it says. And those of you that know me and have been around me for a while or come to church here, you know that I'm a boxing fan. I still really enjoy the gym. I always tell people, hear me on this, I was never really good at it, average at best. My trainer now calls me a plodder. I'm pretty sure that's not good. Pretty sure if you're a plodder, you're not necessarily a good boxer. And over the years, though, I've experienced this just a few times in the ring. And it's this, it's when you get to a place where you realize that the guy that you're in there with is way better than you. You're completely overmatched. You can't win. You are positive that you're not even going to finish the round. Frankly, you get to the spot where sometimes you're just looking for a place to quit. You're hoping that your trainer recognizes it and steps in. And you get to the spot where you almost want to just take a knee and say, I'm finished. But then somehow you manage to dig down and you fight back and you keep going. And the bell rings, and it really is a quite exhilarating feeling. Hear me on this. That's okay in the ring. In fact, it's quite admirable. But folks, it's foolish when it comes to following Jesus. Some of you need to take a knee and surrender to the one who paid it all. And stop your wandering. Stop your religious sort of going through the motions and realize that God sent his son and he desires a relationship with you. last Sunday at the Wexford campus, 22 of our students were baptized that evening. They had a big sort of service with worship. And I really love the way the student ministry at Wexford did it. They showed a brief video of each person. So as the person was stepping into the tub to be baptized, they showed this brief sort of video testimony interview. And they were only like 60 seconds long. They explained sort of how they came to know Jesus and then why they wanted to be baptized. And each testimony was simply amazing. And the room was packed. And people cheered. Like some kids even made like signs. And I think I heard a cowbell. Like, right? I mean, the kids were fired up, cheering on their friends as they were being baptized. So they'd step into the tub, the video would come on, then an elder would baptize them, and the place when they came up out of the water would just erupt into applause. And I'm telling you, man, I was honored to be there. And right towards the end of the night, this little guy named Aiden Taylor, he stepped into the baptismal. And man, you could see he was like really nervous. I mean, he had this look of being really nervous. And then his video went up. Take a look at this.
I'm Aiden. I'm in the 8th grade. I'm 13 and I go to Mars Middle School. I accepted Christ into my life when I was 7, and I didn't exactly realize that I needed him in my life until I was 10 or 11. When I went into the hospital for anxiety and depression, I was having thoughts of suicide, and I thought God had abandoned me, but I realized after lots of praying and God helping me that he will never abandon us, and that he just helped me through all of that. And it's amazing because every day with this anxiety and depression, it gets better and better, and I just pray about it every day, and I'm sure my parents do, and God has blessed me with these great doctors and medicine, and I want to get baptized to show that he has helped me so much with all this, that I want to proclaim that I stand for him and that he is my God and that he is the one that I'm going to follow forever.
And 250 people stood up and gave that little guy a standing ovation. And he was baptized. And I saw him afterwards, and I just said, you are so brave for being willing to do that in front of all your friends, like in front of your middle school and high school friends. That's a brave thing to do. In that video, Aiden said that he felt like God abandoned him. My guess is that there's probably some of you in this room today that maybe have experiencing that, or you're experiencing that right now, that you somehow think God has abandoned you. That's a lie. My guess is there's some of you in this room that feel like that you and God are good, but that you don't really need him. That's a lie. Some of you, I think, have been playing this religious game and somehow keeping score that if you're doing better than most, that somehow at the end you'll be fine. That's a lie. Young Aiden realized and did what I think so many people just ignore or dismiss, the fact that he needed an intimate, personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And when you pursue that with all your heart, soul, and mind, I don't know how it works, but somehow God unlocks heaven, and he ushers in this invisible kingdom of faith into your soul. And the only thing that's standing between you and that happening is you saying what that young boy said. He just said, I stand for him. He is my God, and he is the one I'm going to follow forever. Unlike Cain, who said, accept me for all I've done, Aiden and Abel just basically said, please, God, show me grace. I have nothing to offer but me. For some of you, like that prodigal son, the road back home has to begin somewhere. And I believe it should start today for many of you. Jesus said, if you seek, you will find. If you knock, the door will be open. If you ask, you will receive. And some of you just simply need to ask God into your life and stop wandering around and start walking with God. I know that a lot of you would believe that you're good with God, but are you right with God? Are you clean? Have you been saved? Have you clearly turned over your life to God? Or are you still banking on something that happened back in confirmation class or something that was your parents' faith? Have you made it your own? It is so simple. I think sometimes we just complicate it. It's just a simple prayer between you and God, that I proclaim that you, Jesus, are my Savior. And today I want to walk with you. So will you stand up with me? And if you could, as you just come to your feet, no matter which campus you're participating in today around the city, I just would ask you, let's all bow our heads, close our eyes, give some privacy maybe to the folks around you. And I just, right now, if that is you and you have not made that decision, and that you and God are good, you might say, but frankly, you're not right, that it's a simple prayer. And I would just encourage you, no matter where you're worshiping, just say this to yourself, say it in your heart. God hears you. It's just a prayer. You can use your own words. It just goes something like, God, I need you. God, thank you for sending your Son to clean up this mess. Lord, right now I want to be right with you. I want to commit my heart to you. Forgive me for my past wandering and ways, wanting to do it on my own, wanting to be accepted for what I've done versus for what you've done. And today I make a decision to follow you. And with all heads bowed, no one looking around, and I'm going to ask the campus leaders to just pop up on the platform. But with all heads bowed right now, if you prayed that prayer, I just want you to look up at me.